A blazing hot sun shines down to the citrus trees. Heat waves blur a farm worker's vision as sweat drips down a sunburned cheek. The worker gathers baskets full of oranges and starts the long trek back. When the sun sets, the worker reaches out for the daily wage, but only half the amount is given. As the worker droopily walks home on the sidewalk, threat and stares follow from all directions. Women tightly holding their purses, children running back to their parents. This is the life of an average Bracero program immigrant. For many Mexican-American immigrants in the 20th century, the idea of success was a constantly shifting target, shifted by the war and economic situations. When America needed labor and soldiers, they were welcome, but when the situation changed, they were segregated or deported. It forced them to redefine success as gaining the same American civil liberties. Mexican Americans before the Great Depression were a minority group in the United States, many fleeing from the Mexican Revolution and economic failures, experienced heavy racism and were tagged as cheap labor, which escalated during the Great Depression, where 1.8 million Mexicans were deported through the 1930s Repatriation Act. However, due to World War II drafting many soldiers away from their farms, the U.S. government enacted the Bracero program that allowed Mexicans into the country to fill those empty jobs that provided food for the war, revitalizing opportunity for Mexican Americans, though still undergoing blatant discrimination, allowing them to create their own culture and community within the United States, fighting back against the discrimination in a way that can still be seen today. Mexican workers fled to the United States during the early 1900s due to political and economic turmoil in Mexico, and the abundant work opportunities available in agriculture, mining, and railroads. These jobs were undesirable to most Americans because they were low-paying, but Mexican workers took them as a way to survive and served as a transition into American society. This came to an end when the Great Depression began, as the U.S. launched mass repatriation campaigns, which would go against immigrant workers by only giving jobs to real Americans, leading to the deportation of 1.8 million Mexican Americans. They would also be excluded from many government funding programs as, quote, the Social Security Act of 1935 barred agricultural and domestic workers from Social Security benefits and unemployment insurance, thereby disqualifying large numbers of blacks, Mexicans, and other minorities for these benefits, unquote. This led to many Mexican and Mexican-American families to live in Farm Security Administration camps, which provided basic housing, food, and water in exchange for low-paying labor. But during World War II, Mexican Americans would find some success by joining the military, or they would follow other Mexican men in moving to the U.S. due to the Bracero program, which gave them an opportunity to work on fields that were in need of workers due to many farmers leaving to fight in the war. The Bracero program was a crucial part of Mexican American history in the U.S. However, this program was not quite as good for Mexican Americans as it looks. Before entering the program, Mexicans had to be briefed and go through a humiliating medical check. When creating the Bracero program, the Mexican government negotiated guarantees of fair treatment, wages, and housing, but many of these promises were not carried out. These were not the only problems Mexicans from the Bracero program faced. There was a great deal of tension and racial hate toward the Mexican American population at the time. Some of this hate was shown in the Zoot Suit riots, which was a series of attacks in Los Angeles on anyone wearing zoot suits that were made of wool, a ration material. Many zoot suit wearers were Mexican American youth. Rationing was deemed patriotic in supporting the country, making anyone who wore zoot suits seem disloyal to the U.S. The riots began after the Sleepy Lagoon murder. Jose Gallardo Diaz, a young Mexican American, was found dead after a routing party. This Los Angeles Police Department was quick to arrest several Mexican American youths, labeling them as murderers in the news. Following this, the public was outraged and saw all Mexican American youth as dangerous criminals. Public attacks followed, including brawls between U.S. sailors who were waiting to be deployed into the Pacific and Mexican Americans, who had their zoot suits stripped off of them. The Zoot Suit riots showed the sizable gap between the two American populations, how white Americans looked down upon the Mexican Americans, seeing them as dangerous outsiders rather than fellow citizens. Overall, this was a massive injustice against the Mexican American population. While the attacks were branded as the Zoot Suit riots, claiming that they were a result of the rationing issue, in reality, they were brought up by systemic racism and hatred against the Mexican American community. Following the war, the definition of success shifted again, moving from pure survival to receiving civil rights. During the course of World War II, over 400,000 Mexican Americans chose to fight in the war, believing that patriotism would bring respect and economic opportunity. However, returning from the war, many were denied the GI Bill, which was supposed to provide funding for education, low-interest home loans, and unemployment compensation. They continued to face discrimination known as de facto segregation, where, quote, restaurants had signs on their doors reading "No dogs or Mexican." At movie theaters, Mexican Americans had to sit in the balcony, not the lower level. Public swimming pools had Mexican Mondays, after which the pool was drained and cleaned before Anglo residents would step foot in again, unquote. Even individuals who earned the Medal of Honor were not exempt, as Macario Garcia was denied service at a diner due to the policy of, quote, not serving Mexicans, unquote. Mexican Americans could no longer accept second-class citizenship, so the demands of equality and activism became apparent, redefining their success. Alianza Hispano-Americana used its influence to fight legal battles regarding discrimination and segregation against Mexican Americans, with more than a dozen cases. Combined with the LULAC, these groups formed a powerful force advocating for civil rights that successfully challenged segregation in housing, education, and employment. Other successes include school desegregation and the end of discriminatory hiring practices. By fighting for desegregation in all aspects of daily life, Mexican Americans were not just asking for equality, but demanding to be recognized as fully American, which means the same rights and privileges as white citizens. From the Great Depression to World War II, Mexican American status in the United States and their ability to call themselves American was fragile, as changes in economic factors or wartime needs could cause it to disappear. In the 1930s, the mass repatriation deported around 1.8 million people of Mexican origin, and during World War II, they were brought back via the Bracero program as temporary workers to feed the nation, while still being denied basic rights or respect. These cycles of exploitation and discrimination pushed Mexican Americans to fight back through civil rights activism and redefine success as winning the deserved rights of being treated and recognized as Americans. Even today, immigration policies and ICE raids cause Mexican Americans to ask one another if the community belongs. The U.S. repeats the same mistakes of mass deportations, exclusions, and unfair incarcerations. This repeated humiliation makes it clear that the true American success is about recognizing Mexican Americans not as expendable, but as citizens whose dignity and rights define what the nation claims to represent.